doesn't complain, and he gets everything done that we really couldn't do without him. So there's a certificate of appreciation presented to Leanne Cookson, recognizing the countless hours you have given to the Orono Police Department and the town of Orono over 21 years of volunteer service. You have given unselfishly, and your efforts have helped us build an exceptional resource to the community. And I want to thank you very much, and I'm sorry I lied to you about getting you here.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. No speeches.
Josh, can you just talk? I know that Cookie has given us many years of service. That's impressive all on its own. But if you could just talk about the average hours in a week that he gives us, and the fact that he, has to. We get angry when he doesn't approve his vacation when he takes off.
Officially, how many hours do you work a week for us?
Officially, it's 3 hours a day.
Then that's all he works for us is 3 hours a day. I will not publicly state anything different.
Thank you, Lee, for all of your work. We truly appreciate it. Moving on to approval of minutes of June 13th, 2016. I'll take a motion.
Move approval. Second.
All right. Any discussion, comments, corrections on the minutes? Hearing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Move on to public hearings. Public hearing A, to consider authorizing the consolidation of voting for the federal state elections for Ward 1, Precincts 1, 2, 3 to one central voting place, UMaine Fieldhouse, while the college is in regular session. All local elections and June referendum elections shall be held in the council chambers as historically practiced, pending final approval from the Secretary of State. You want to introduce this?
Yes. Our clerk, Shelley Crosby, could not be here tonight because she is at New England Clerk School, so she's being educated. We've talked about this twice in council committee, but just to recap for everybody, when I first got to Orono back in 2011, we actually voted in 3 separate locations for each election. We held polling locations on campus for those students who live on campus. We had polls open in council chambers, and we also had polls at the senior center or Birch Street School. What we realized, and I think it had a lot to do with the advent of some off-campus housing, is that the Birch Street School location was simply way too small. We had people circling the Birch Street School, the line going out the door and circling the building in November, and there were significant complaints about that. The other thing that we were noticing is that having polling locations 2 separate off-campus polling locations meant that students who moved off campus and wanted to register to vote were oftentimes bounced back and forth between polling locations to be able to register the day at the polls. We tried to solve that by consolidating a few years ago to go up to the Orono Middle School. And while logistically inside the building, that worked quite well as far as space, we ran into real problems because our peak times matched school traffic peak times, and there simply was not enough parking, and getting in and out of the Route 2 corridor at peak flow times, which are also peak voting times, was very, very difficult, and we fielded lots of complaints. My understanding from conversations with the school superintendent is that there were also a few concerns raised about the significant traffic from members of the public in and out of the school during the school day. We talked with the school about whether or not having an in-service day on voting day would work, and the problem that the school ran into is that our calendar has to sync with the United Technology Center, UTC, calendar, and so it wouldn't have worked to have in-service day. So staff did a search of buildings in the community that would be able to hold the significant number of voters that we would expect to see on a regular general election, and determined quite quickly that we don't have a lot of those buildings that, number one, are big enough, and number two, while being big enough, would also meet the ADA codes that this elections requires. We had a conversation with the University of Maine, and they have been willing to allow us to try to use the field house. We've done all preliminary conversations with the university and with the state, and in order to move forward and formalize this and have the university finalize a plan that would work, we need to have this public hearing, and the council needs to make a vote, because that's what gets everything started at the state level. In committee, we heard significant concerns from counselors about the concern about asking residents to vote on campus, about the confusion about where to go, parking, talking with the university. I think that there are ways we can mitigate the parking concerns. We talked about the need for significant signage. We will be talking with the Community Connector, which is the arm of the city of Bangor that runs the Black Bear Express, about adding potentially an additional bus on during peak flow election time, so that we can drop people at the field house. So the thought is, this is not perfect, but of all of our options in front of us at this time, this is the option that would make the best use of our very limited resources and allow members of the public who are coming to vote a one-stop option, which we think is really important, to limit the time that people have to be at the polls. So like I said, this is an opportunity for the public to give comment, and later on in the agenda, there is an order that would authorize me to sign the document for the state to consider this and begin final work with the university to make sure that the plan will come together and work.
Well, we'll hear from the public now. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this matter? Nope. All right. Thank you, Sophie. We will close the public hearing. We will move on to public hearing B, to consider authorizing the consolidation of Ward 1 precincts 1, 2, 3 to one centralized voting district for any and all federal, state, local election, which shall be named Ward 1 Precinct 1. This proposed change will not change any of the current designated district seats for federal and state offices. This public hearing is going to be tabled until we get through the November election.
If it's okay, this was a conversation that we had at the committee level, where staff indicated that the state had recommended that council consider consolidating into one voting district, which would simply be the boundaries of the town. There was a really good conversation about that, and at the end, what the councilors asked is that we hold this, see how the November election works, and then come back and have this discussion after the November election.
Sounds good to me. Moving on to public hearing C.
Do you need a motion to table it?
Do I, for a public hearing?
I think you do, don't you?
I'll take a motion.
Move to table.
Second?
All right. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Public hearing C, a proposed land use amendment to section 18-138 to allow the renting of an accessory dwelling unit in an accessory structure as well as in the single-family dwelling itself. Evan?
Thank you. Good evening. Evan Rickert, Town Planner. This is an amendment that, a little bit of background for those who may be listening. since at least 1999, and I think probably before, but I'm not sure how far back it goes, the town of Orono has allowed accessory dwelling units to be located within a single-family home. An accessory dwelling unit is defined and limited by ordinance to a single dwelling unit that is no more than 500 square feet in area, no more than one bedroom, has no more than 2 occupants. And it is simply at that small size within a single-family dwelling that is owner-occupied is simply regarded as an accessory use, not as an additional whole dwelling unit that triggers various other land use requirements. We know there are a number of accessory dwelling units. It's hard to say how many, but from the rental registration, we know that there are a number of them. And through the comprehensive planning process, we learned that there appears to be almost no issues with rental situations where the owner's on the premises and and it's very small scale. So it seems to be able to be absorbed into a neighborhood better than many other kinds of rental situations. And so the recommendation of the comprehensive plan was to not only maintain the idea of an accessory dwelling unit, but to expand it to allow the accessory dwelling unit and accessory dwelling unit in an accessory structure. You can only have one accessory dwelling unit per property, but it could be in an accessory structure under this amendment instead of in the single-family dwelling itself. The planning board, you referred this to the planning board. The planning board made its recommendation by taking into account some concerns that had been raised, and among other things recommended that there be a setback requirement for that accessory structure that exceeds what would ordinarily be required for an accessory structure. So the board recommended that the structure be at least 15 feet from the property line at the time it is put into such a use. Could be a garage or an outbuilding that's put into such a use. At least 15 feet from the property line, at least 20 feet from any other occupied structure at the time of its being installed. With that, it recommended approval as consistent with the recommendation of the comprehensive plan. This amendment has been further modified in response to concerns by the town council over the last couple of months to also require that if there was going to be an accessory dwelling unit in an accessory structure, there would have to be a minimum lot size that was met, and what is incorporated here is a minimum lot size of 1/5 of an acre, about just over 8,700 square feet. And further, that as an enforcement measure, because the concern is that people will forget over time and that an accessory dwelling unit will be in place, whether in the single-family home or in the accessory structure. And as property changes hands and maybe no longer is owner-occupied, the accessory dwelling unit continues and therefore violate the owner occupancy requirement of the ordinance. But it's hard to catch that. And so to put everybody on notice, so there can be no mistake about it, the further amendment or the further modification of this proposed amendment requires that, first of all, any accessory dwelling unit be registered. It makes that clear. It has to be anyways, but it makes it clear under the rental registry ordinance. And secondly, that at the time of registration, a standard agreement is signed by the property owner specifying that the accessory dwelling unit may exist only as long as the single-family dwelling is owner-occupied, and then the town would record that agreement in the Register of Deeds so that any future purchaser would know or should know that that is a condition and that they cannot buy it simply as a rental property, not owner-occupied. So that is the proposal. It is to, in some, allow accessory dwelling units in an accessory structure as well as in the single-family home itself, just one per property, with all those conditions: minimum lot size, minimum setback, and being able to track through an agreement recorded at the Register of Deeds.
Thank you, Evan. There has been lots of debate in council on this, and,
Question.
go ahead.
One of the things that I ended up being concerned about after, the last conversation that we had, I thought about it further, is the grandfathering. And as I understand it, that right now, if there were an accessory dwelling unit in an accessory building, it's not permitted, is that correct? In town?
Correct, it is not permitted.
Okay. But they may exist.
They may exist.
So,
They would not be grandfathered,
period.
period. Because a non-conforming use is grandfathered only if it legally existed prior to the enactment of the...
Legally what?
Legally existed prior to the enactment of the ordinance.
Uh,
They don't legally exist.
But don't you suspect that there are people who have these units and unknowing?
I think there could be, yes.
And what you're saying is, if I might be depending on that income, and if through discovery, I mean, obviously, we don't know that they exist, there haven't been any complaints, otherwise we would know about them. So what happens to somebody who has one of these units, not knowing that it's not legal because it perhaps existed when they purchased the property? We're gonna come along and say, you can't have this income anymore?
But Judy, it's never been legal.
It's never been,
But
if they were,
Would
forget,
there have been a point in time when it wouldn't have been illegal? In other words, what I'm saying is that there was a point, I mean, Orono is an old town, there have been houses around, there have been garages around, there have been apartments and garages for a long time. Were they ever, I mean, how far back do we go that it was not allowed or was disallowed? I mean, if it wasn't disallowed, I would assume it was allowed. And if I purchased one of these properties, unknowing that it was not a quote-unquote legal, it may have been, when it was done, not illegal either, because it may not have been not allowed.
I
See what I'm
suppose,
saying?
I suppose we could go back to the earliest zoning ordinances of the town, and look, but I'm going to guess that it has never been, as long as, if it pre-existed zoning, period, and I don't know if that was 50 or 60 years ago, probably the town of Orono first adopted zoning in the I'm going to guess the 1940s or thereabouts. If it pre-existed that, then they would be grandfathered, as all activities would have been. But if it started up in the 1970s or 1980s, the town certainly did have zoning then, and as far as I can tell, the idea of accessory dwelling units was never part of the zoning, and I believe it was probably in the 1990s that the town allowed accessory dwelling units to exist without
So if.
without requiring additional land area. Now, if these folks have an accessory dwelling unit in an accessory structure and the lot area is large enough to meet the density standard, that could be simply regarded, because you can have two-family dwellings in our single-family, two-family zones. But if it's on an undersized lot, existed, came into existence after the town had zoning, then just like any other, quite apart from this amendment.
So even if it let's say it meets the guidelines,
If it meets all the guidelines, then I think it would simply be a matter of, I can't speak
Yeah.
for what
But
code
if-
enforcement would
yeah.
do about the past, but if they met all the guidelines and could now legally do it, they would come in, they would register, they would sign the agreement, and.
so what we're doing, we have setbacks that are larger, more land required.
Right.
Then typically, if I built a garage without an accessory structure in it, I could be
Right.
closer to those
Correct.
boundaries.
You could
I
be-
could build an addition on my house and be closer to those boundaries. So someone has built a garage, it has an accessory unit in it, it's within the boundaries that would be allowed otherwise, which are a little bit more lenient than these. Then what?
They
No complaints have been filed.
They simply cannot have an accessory apartment unless you amend the ordinance accordingly. They simply cannot have an accessory apartment in an accessory structure.
And I guess what bothers me about that is, being the sense that somebody might be out there depending on that income.
Yes.
And we're gonna take it away from them and might cause undue hardship. And I don't, I, as you know, have been supportive of this.
Yes.
And I have lived with some of the restrictions. But when the more I think about the grandfathering and what that could do to somebody and jeopardize them, I have some issues with that, and I don't know if it, I could see making it required that be owner occupied, but maybe if it fits the dimensions that were required normally in that area.
Judy, this is really the public hearing. The council will get another bite at it, so we should really, kind of take your suggestions at the council
Okay.
discussion. I don't know if you want to answer it now, but.
No, that's, I mean, the counselor asked a good question, and I tried to answer it as accurately as possible. Ultimately, it's a matter of policy for the council to decide, and I'm relatively neutral. I will draft it in the way that the council would like to see it drafted, if you want to make it more lenient than it presently is.
And I'm sure that there's other counselors that want to weigh in, so, but we'll finish the public hearing first. Is there anyone that wishes to speak?
I actually have a couple of questions in terms of the accessory dwelling. The definition of that would that be like a garage that's been converted into a live space?
Yes.
Essentially, that's what it's referring to. Okay, and so my other question, so would it be the legality of it? Is it illegal to collect rent on a person dwelling within a space? Or is it simply being debated as to whether or not it's illegal for someone to actually dwell in a space?
Go ahead, Soph.
So, I'm going to take a stab because I'm here next to a microphone. A dwelling unit is a dwelling unit. It's not about whether it's rented. It's a dwelling unit. And the other thing I would just clarify is an accessory structure is any structure on a property that is not attached to the main dwelling. So what this contemplates is whether or not we would want to allow people on that limited basis to put a dwelling unit smaller than normal into an accessory structure, which is currently prohibited.
So it's prohibited then to convert a structure such as a garage into a livable space, semi-livable space.
Yeah, as the only exception to that, Susan, is if you have enough land area to support 2 dwelling units, which is kind of hard threshold to meet at times in the MDR.
Right. Okay. So it's just not legal, whether a person's collecting rent or not, it's not permitted.
At this time. Right.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, I will close public hearing C. Move on to public hearing D, to consider a Vittler's license for Big Shoe Inc., doing business as Subway, 10 Stillwater Avenue, Hospi Food Service Inc., doing business as Subway, 53 Main Street, Orono House of Pizza Inc., 154 Park Street, or OHOP is going to be continued to August 8th council meeting because they are going to go for a liquor license at the same time. And CamRec Inc., doing business as Spotlight Cinemas, 6 Stillwater Avenue. Dave?
Hi, good evening. Dave Mylan, the Economic Development Director, and I apologize that this public hearing will be nowhere near as exciting as the accessory structure public hearing. But for all of those licensees are routine renewal of licenses. So all inspections have been completed, the state licenses are current, and the staff is recommending approval of licenses.
All right. Anyone wishing to speak for or against granting these licenses? Hearing none, I will close public hearing D. Move on to public hearing E, to consider a Vittler's license for Orono Trampoline Park, 6 Stillwater Avenue. This will also be continued to August 8th, 2016, because it's not quite done yet. Might as well take a motion on this one, seeing as we took a motion to table the last one.
Move to table.
Second.
It's just continued.
Oh, see, I don't have, it's not tabled? Okay,
It's
well,
not the same as the table.
oh, sorry, it's not the same as tabling. Okay. All right, I'll get them ready right here. Acknowledgements by council members. Clint? Nothing? Tom?
Yes, I'd like to acknowledge the departure of our school superintendent, Joanne Harriman, who, as many of you know, is leaving Orono after 3 years and going to a elementary principalship on the coast of Maine, where she has family. I think she's leaving our system in a better situation than when she found it, and I wish the school committee well in finding a replacement.
Thanks. Sam? Judy? Jeff?
I was going to echo Tom's comments on Joanne. I think she's been a real plus to the community in terms of management of the school and presentation of information to the council. So.
Great, thanks. Tom?
Let me try that again. I'm really enjoying the weather, and I want to compliment all the volunteers who've worked on beautifying the town. The flowers are wonderful.
Great. Next, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I will take a motion.
Move the items on the consent agenda.
Second?
Second?
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, Order 16-127, order authorizing the consolidation of voting for federal state elections for Ward 1, Precincts 1, 2, and 3 to one central voting place, UMaine Fieldhouse, while the college is in regular session. All local elections and June referendum elections shall be held in the council chambers as historically practiced, pending final approval from the Secretary of State. Take a motion, please.
Second?
All right, any discussion?
So I just outlined this on the public hearing. Just of note, this is where we start the process formally. So this will come back when we have a final plan.
Okay. Tom?
I'd just like to echo a comment that Sophie made during her earlier presentation. I don't think this is a perfect solution. I would much rather see voting take place in the municipality, but I think it's the best option that we have at this time.
Okay. Anyone else? I agree with you, Tom, that, if we could come up with another solution, I'd like to bring it back, but I think with all of the apartment complexes, we really have to be able to service everyone. So, all right, I will take a vote on Order 16-127. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. That's a lot of explanation. Order 16-128, order approving ordinance amendments to the land use section 18-31 definitions to define house guest and add a reference to this definition under the definition of family, and land use section 18-81 violations H, documentation of number of unrelated persons in a dwelling unit. I will take a motion, please.
Move approval.
Second?
All right. Want to present this, Evan?
Yes, you've discussed this a number of times, so I'm here primarily to answer questions, but just as a quick review, this is one small piece of a much larger and complex puzzle as to how to balance the need for student housing and other rentals in the community with maintaining the stability of those neighborhoods where they are going. And one of the features of enforcement is the definition of family in the ordinance. It's been in there for a long time, currently limiting family to, in the medium density residential district, to no more than 3 unrelated persons, and in other districts to 5. The question is, when you have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, and somebody says, well, they're not really residents, they're just guests, that becomes a big loophole that the Code Enforcement Office has not been able to overcome. And so this defines what a house guest is, indicates it's a person who is staying overnight in the dwelling unit no more than 14 nights, and they're not otherwise on the lease or have legal residency status in that dwelling unit. And if the code enforcement office has credible reason to believe that somebody may be in violation, a property may be in violation of that number of unrelated people, the code enforcement officer can request the property owner to provide copies of the leases and names of who are on the leases and affidavits that, to the best of his or her knowledge, no other person is living there. And then that gives a route for more discovery and understanding what the situation is, or simply to have the property owner, the landlord, solve that, remediate that situation. So it's one small piece that's not going to itself be easily enforceable, but it is one small and necessary piece. It's a necessary, though probably insufficient piece.
Does this also include the regulation that we talked about concerning Airbnb and the other things?
That's coming up in a different amendment that the planning board is considering this month. Yes, that's okay. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions or discussion? I actually think this gives the landlords a little bit of direction as well, because the landlords can then go to the tenants and say, code enforcement is asking me who's here, and so I personally think it gives landlords a little bit of something to hang their hats on.
That's right.
So, all right. No further discussion. I will take a vote on Order 16-128. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Order 16-129, order authorizing the town manager to sign a renewal 3-year contract with medical reimbursement services for EMS billing services. Take a motion, please.
Move approval.
All right. Rob?
Rob St. Louis, Fire Chief. Just a quick background on EMS billing. Back in 1998, when we took over the full-time ambulance squad, all our EMS billing was done through Bangor Fire Department. And they had a staff of 2 that took care of us, along with 6 other departments. In last July, we came to council with a recommendation that we look to go to medical reimbursement out of Windham, Maine, a company that was highly recommended by other departments in the state of Maine on their customer service, their increase in collections of bills, and also they provided a quality insurance training program for EMS providers in the departments to also help with the collections of EMS billing. So back in 2015, we came to council. You approved a 1-year trial contract through medical reimbursements. We have noticed over the last year that our collections went from 67% to 84%. Also, like I said, the customer service feedback we're receiving is very positive from citizens and also with our EMS providers. They will notify me weekly on any EMS reporting issues, so we get them corrected. They send us detailed statements monthly outlining what insurance companies are paying, what a patient is paying, and then the amount that is collected. So tonight we're asking to approval to sign a 3-year contract once again with medical reimbursements. The language will remain the same, and there is a they collect a 6% of everything they collect. Talking to them this afternoon, there is a few larger departments that may be signing a contract with them, so there is a possibility that they would like us, there would possibly be amendment to the 6%, so it possibly could go down to, they said possibly 5 or 4%. That will all depend on whether the larger departments join with them.
I just want to clarify that that would be for us because we made a referral, so they would be thanking us for our referral by dropping the percent that they collect, they retain.
For
If-
all 3 years?
Yes.
Anyone have any questions for Rob? Discussions?
It's been a good move. It certainly sounds though it's something we ought to continue doing.
And, and the 6%, was that's better than what it,
What we did with
Bangor?
what we did with Bangor, it was not what I understand, there was not a contract signed. It
Oh,
was
okay.
just an agreement between the two towns, and what they charged was $10 per call. So at that time, it wasn't as that expensive, but with the increase in calls that we're having now, the 6% seems to be working well for us.
Great. All right, I will take a vote. All those in favor of Order 16-129? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Rob. Order 16-130, order authorizing the purchase of a 2017 Ford Utility Police Interceptor from Darlings Ford of Bangor in the amount of $29,206, plus $7,000 for equipment purchase and setup through Custom Installations LLC of Levant, and graphics work done through Graphics Design of Old Town for $700. Total cost is $36,906 to be drawn from the FY17 capital equipment budget. Take a motion, please.
So moved?
Clint seconds.
All right, Josh?
Josh Ewing, Chief of Police. For a little bit of background, the current vehicle replacement plan kind of enables the police department to maintain the overall quality and dependability of the fleet. We've learned over the years that once the cars reach a certain mileage, they start costing us time and money to keep them on the road. And when they're down, it's not just a fact that we have to pay to have them fixed, it's that they're out of service. It requires that extra
Yes.
effort of getting them to and from where they need to be fixed, and
Yeah.
for as long as they're down, we're down a vehicle, and that impacts our ability to be out on the road in a visible presence. And because of that type of the use and the environmental impact, those costs do tend to go up when they reach a higher mileage, and they're more likely to go down, and they're more likely to cost even more money to maintain. So we try to maintain a replacement plan of 1 car 1 year, 2 cars the next, and that seems to maintain a good workable fleet for us. So we put out bids for this year. The low bid came in from Darlings in Bangor. And we've used Custom Installations the last few years. The quality is much higher, and the dependability and the efficiency of using that location has worked out very well for the agency, and the graphics we've traditionally done right in Old Town, and it's a 1-day turnaround, and we get the car back quickly. So staff would recommend approval.
Anyone have any questions or comments or discussion? And we've discussed that the car that is going out of your service we're being utilized, no, we're just getting rid of
That's next year.
next year. I keep pushing
Sorry.
on one.
I know.
I really want to
It's
do
not a
that.
bad thing.
So this is the SUV type that you have been getting,
Yeah,
right?
so we're going to continue to get the same SUV type, and that'll be our whole fleet ultimately, until someone decides to change the model again. The goal is to maintain the same vehicle throughout the fleet, so we can replace and swap equipment over more smoothly.
Great. All right, I will take a vote on Order 16-130. All those in favor? Passes unanimously?
Nice to see a local company be low bidder.
Yeah.
That hasn't necessarily been the case.
Thank you.
Order 16-131, order authorizing the town manager to sign and execute an agreement with Vaughn Thibodeau II, Inc. of Bangor for the Pine Street, Mill Street municipal parking lots and electrical improvements project in the amount of $360,565 to be drawn from the downtown and transit-oriented TIF funds. Take a motion, please.
Move approval? Second?
And Rob.
Good evening, Rob Yerxa, Public Works Director. I apologize for the frog. We've been working with Oliver Associates to develop a project to make some improvements to the 3 major municipal parking lots that we have downtown. The Pine Street parking lot, which is the one off Pine Street, the one behind the town office here, as well as the upper parking lot off Mill Street by the barber shop, Family Dog, Verve area. Our budget for this project was $465,000. As you can see, the low bids that we received on July 1st was $360,000 and change, significantly lower than our budget. I reviewed the bid, and it just appears that we were very conservative with paving prices, I'd heard rumors throughout the region that paving prices were actually coming down a little bit, and this, I guess, is evidence of that. But I think this is also a situation where we found a contractor that was being very aggressive with their bid to make sure they got the project. The $130,000 span between the two bids wouldn't normally appear all that crazy if we had a few more bidders in between. But I think one of the elements of this project that made it very specific to a certain contractor was that the completion date is very aggressive. The contract requires that all 3 parking lots be complete. Both, that's the electrical and the striping and everything, to hand it back over to the town on August 20th. So if there were contractors out there that didn't have space in their schedule this summer to do it, they probably just didn't bid it. So while initially the $360,000 bid to me was a bit concerning, having looked at it, we've worked with Von Thibodeau before. He was the site contractor for the Katahdin site work, so he's certainly capable of performing the work. I'm pretty confident that this bid is a good bid, and it certainly fits our budget and allows us to move some of those funds to other projects that we'll be looking at later.
Anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah, Rob, does the design for the lot, the Pine Street lot in particular, include conduit for fiber optics to service the businesses on Mill Street?
No, it does not.
Should it?
Shouldn't it?
Well, we've
had
talked
this
about this internally a little bit, but until we get to the point where we have confidence in what we need to put in the ground, I think it's a little difficult to just move forward with conduit, because conduit can mean a lot of different things, and Belle's gonna talk about that, I guess.
So Jeff, we just got a specification from
Right.
the Magellan Advisors that gives details on what type of conduit, how far apart from other utilities it should be, how deep it should be buried, et cetera, last week. And the bid package for this had already been put out, and bids were received last week, correct? So.
July 1st.
Yeah, so this, we weren't able to put it in, the bid package. I might ask Rob to ask the question about how much it would cost to include it.
All right.
So the more complete answer to your question is, now that we have a specification on what we need to use for conduit, I'm sure we can negotiate that with this contractor, and given the fact that we have considerably under budget bid here, we can probably work it into the contract relatively easily.
And Rob,
Glad I asked.
the electrical upgrade, is just upgrading what's already there, or?
Yeah, we're going to use most of the existing bases. We're just going to replace the poles and fixtures, upgrade them to LED lights to lower the load, so that means that the wire doesn't need to be replaced. So we're going to reuse the existing conduit and wiring and replace essentially just the fixtures.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
We had a hearing on this project with the business people. Is that right, Rob?
Yeah, we held a public hearing or a meeting, we've had a public meeting, it wasn't a hearing, I guess, in January, Bill? Yeah, at some point like that.
Did we get any significant
It wasn't very
feedback?
well attended, but I didn't, we didn't get a whole lot of feedback either. The scope of this project doesn't make any wholesale changes to any of the lots. It's essentially a facelift. We're gonna resurface the pavement, a lot of new curbing, some drainage improvements, and of course the electrical.
Right.
But essentially, the layout of all the lots and all that essentially stays the same.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
You think, I mean, I know we don't know exactly with the new conduit, but we'd still probably be under budget even by adding Jeff's
Oh,
conduit.
yes, no, the conduit won't be a significant
Great.
addition. Especially given since we're paving it anyways, it makes sense.
All right, anyone else? All right, I will take a vote on Order 16131. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Moving on to Order 16132, order authorizing the town manager to sign and execute an agreement with Sebago Technics for a Phase 2 environmental review of the old Public Works Garage property in an amount not to exceed $16,000 from the FY17 capital facilities budget. Take a motion, please.
Second?
Rob?
Good evening again, Rob Yerxa. We have been working with Sebago Technics essentially from the beginning on this public works facility project. I look at it as kind of one project that we've phased our way through. Now that the new facility is essentially complete, it's time to start thinking about the old facility at Penobscot Street and how we want to deal with that lot moving forward. As part of the initial assessment of all the lots during our lot selection, our site selection process, we did an environmental assessment of the existing facility because that was one of the places that we were considering to renovate that site. And so we had already done the Phase 1 assessment of that lot. Things were found in that assessment that indicated a Phase 2 would be necessary to move that lot forward if we ever chose to change the use of that lot in some way, whether we were to sell it or reuse it as a town facility. We'd need to do a little bit further investigation, primarily in the soils that are there, to assess if there's any contaminated soil, given its past use with essentially an industrial use and salt storage, particularly an older fueling area. There could potentially and likely are some amounts of contaminated soil that would need to be dealt with. The Department of Environmental Protection has a Voluntary Response Action Program, or VRAP program, that allows you to do these assessments, work with the DEP at the same time to establish, generally you end up with a soil management program that would essentially, in partnership with the DEP, decide how we would remediate the soils to make the site as clean as possible, but also release the town of any liability moving forward should something else be discovered. So in those, essentially you'd end up with what's called a no action assurance from the DEP once the VRAP process is complete. So that essentially would allow you to, and depending on, sometimes the no action assurance comes with conditions for what potential uses you can use the lot for. So at the end of this process, the DEP may tell us that this can be whatever you want it to be. They may not, they may restrict like single home residential use, something like that. They may tell you that you can't you can't site a well on that site for drinking. Some things like that could come out of the back of this process, but either way, this is the next step necessary for the town to take to decide how you all would like to deal with this lot.
If I could, the thing that's important about the VRAP is it removes the town's liability in this brownfield site moving forward. So once we comply, it goes on the record. If there were some kind of cleanup that needed to happen in the future, the town would not be on the hook for that.
Any questions or comments of Rob? Rob, how long is the Public Works, how long was it a Public Works garage?
Not exactly sure. My understanding is in the early 60s, 1962, the building was built.
Okay.
So, and it's been Public Works site since then. It housed the school's buses for a while. At some point, I'm not exactly sure when, but either way, it's been a municipal site for
50 years
better
or so.
than 50 years, yeah. Before I was born, yeah.
All right. Having no other questions or comments, I'll take a vote on Order 16-132. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Order 16-133, order authorizing the purchase of a 2016 F-150 XL 4x4 extended cab pickup truck from Darling's Bangor Ford in the amount of $24,591 to be drawn from the FY17 capital equipment budget. Motion, please.
Move approval.
Second?
Sophie?
That is me. Our Parks and Rec director is umpiring an adult softball game. So as part of our FY17 capital equipment budget that was adopted by council last month, you appropriated $25,000 to allow us to replace a 1996 pickup truck that's currently used by the Parks and Rec department. Mitch, our Parks and Rec director, received 3 quotes for this, and Darling's Ford was the low bidder at $24,591. This is an extended cab pickup truck with a spray liner, and Darling's was very competitive.
Any questions for Sophie on it? All right. Hearing none, I will take a vote on Order 16-133. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Moving on to future agenda items and items of concern. Judy, do you have any? Jeff?
At some point, can we bring up the issue of laying conduit in the streets as we repair streets and dig them up and that sort of thing? I don't know if that was something we had already talked about doing in the future or not, but, yeah, okay, thank you.
Tom? Nothing. Sam? Tom?
Yes, at some point, I would like to have a discussion at a committee meeting, and this certainly doesn't have to happen until fall, in regard to a comment that was made by one of the members of the public at our last meeting on the taping of committee meetings. I know we've talked about it once before, but I think it's a legitimate concern that we ought to revisit.
I actually have that scheduled for the 18th.
Not you on top of things. Oh, and one other thing, I think all councilors received within the last week a letter from Maine Municipal Association with a survey on it, which was asking you to respond, establishing legislative priorities that the Legislative Policy Committee will work with the staff on, and I just encourage everybody to return that form. It really is important in establishing what priorities the association is going to work on in the next legislative session.
Okay. Clint?
I want us to revisit the discussion on November, the reserve, whether we're going to assess We haven't decided that, have we yet?
Uh,
We talked about it, that we're gonna come up with a higher assessment.
I can't hear what Clint's saying. What are you saying, Clint?
We talked earlier about after the incident. After the incident of what happened, that we would consider coming up with a different kind of punitive measure. And I wanted us to have that discussion.
I think you're talking about the disorderly events
Yeah.
ordinance. Yep, I have that. It is almost ready to go to Roger Huber for a first review to make sure I'm not asking you to consider something that's illegal. Always important to stay legal. And my thought had been to try to have a draft out to council by the end of this month for full discussion, probably starting in September. My understanding is folks don't tend to be comfortable enacting those types of ordinances that have strong ramifications on the community in the summer.
Just wanted to know.
Tofi, did you have any items of concern?
Well, I don't normally do this, but I have two. I'm not sure that maybe it's more appropriate for the public comment.
You want to wait for?
I'll wait, yep.
Okay. Okay. Public petitions, I don't think we have any. Public comments?
I attempt to bring something to council monthly, and I was almost at a loss this month. What did come to mind, it's been a good month.
Yeah.
From the no news is good news. However, there's been like a lot of tragedy in headlines that came to mind like the past month. And after thinking about those tragedies, I started considering perhaps to prevent further reports of tragedy. I will reiterate with the call of the wild of the summer season, going to all the outdoors people, perhaps reiterate safety within the outdoors, such as, all those hikers. Keep alert on the trails, don't fall off the cliffs again. If people are creating bonfires, make certain to extinguish them entirely before leaving the sites. And I suppose I'll mention again, there are lions and tigers and bears, specifically bears, occasionally within the vicinity. So it's like keep that alertness, and if possible, if inexperienced, find a guide and buddy system if one has buddies.
Thank you, Susan. I think which one of you's going first? That's the question.
Well, Clint trumps all of us.
I was going to say something funny. The thing about bears, out on Forest Avenue the other day, I saw a mother bear and two babies coming across the thing.
Wow.
And that's one of the most dangerous situations. Call the bear with the cubs.
Okay, no fighting over there.
Well, we're actually going to talk about the same thing. We might not say the same thing, so I want her to stay. So I'm going to go backwards. The last thing I had wanted to talk about was just upcoming meetings. It's summer. Things are kind of different. We have a comp plan implementation committee meeting that it would normally be held on the 21st of July. Evan is going to be out of town. And so we would like to have that meeting on the 28th of July at 6 o'clock. That's going to be a really important meeting because we're going to talk about the Main Street Overlay District. And we also want to share some of our concerns about development on the Park Street corridor and find out how council wants to address that. Councilors might want to address that. The second thing I would just mention is next week we have a committee meeting on the 18th. I think I'm going to have an executive session, special council meeting with an executive session to talk about a personnel matter. And then we have some really important things on that agenda, along with the concern about taping of council meetings. We also are going to talk about cemetery investments and some suggestions for how council might move forward in our organizational structure, because we seem to be having a lot of meetings, and I want to talk to council about whether or not it's a productive use of our time, or if perhaps we can be a little bit more efficient, and how can we find that balance between efficiency and making sure that everybody has their say. And then, speaking of efficiency and burning out counselors, which I don't want to do, I'm going to try very hard to limit our August meetings. I know for sure we're not planning to have meetings on the, I think it's the 22nd and the 29th, the last two Mondays. If possible, we're going to try not to have a meeting on August 8th. As we get closer to the end of this month, I'll be able to confirm that with folks. And then the thing that Belle and I are vying to be able to talk about, and I'll let her talk about the mechanics of it, but we, on June 30th, the town launched its new website. And I would just like to give Belle and Dave Myland, Mitch Stone, and Lori Carpenter kudos, because an awful lot of work went into this website. And when we chose it, number one, because the price was right, but number two, because it will allow us to adapt and grow as we move forward and change it. I was not prepared for the level of detail that our fine assistant town manager took in putting this website together. She spent hours and hours to find pictures and then to manipulate pictures to make sure that they were just the right picture for the site. When we got the original design, it was not something that staff was particularly wild about. And the amount of time and effort that Belle put into this is absolutely incredible, and would not have happened without her guidance. And I appreciate that. So now you can talk about the mechanics of it.
As I blush. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. What I really wanted to say about the website is that it does indeed offer a lot of new functionality for our citizens to communicate with the town, and I would highly encourage anybody listening to go onto the new website, to sign up for an account, and then to choose different alerts to get notified about. You can get notified about news items from different departments or from all the departments. You can get notified about new job postings from different departments or all departments. You can get notified every time there's a new agenda that goes up, or you can choose one item and not the others, or you can choose everything. So that gives us a way to communicate to you, and you can do it by text message or by email. And also there are feedback forms online that you can use to communicate to us. And I think in the near future, we will be rolling out online bill payment so that we can do, when you're sitting at home and you want to get a dump permit, you can do that even if it's 10 o'clock at night and not, between 8:30 and 4:30, Monday through Friday. And also some of the other forms that require payment will allow you to do that online and then come in and if you need to see us. But hopefully we'll make things a little more efficient, both for the front desk and for residents.
Thank you very much, Belle. All right. On that note, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, really? You don't need. All right, all those in favor? That's unanimously.
Creating my profile right now.
Oh, my Lord.
You can upload a photo. What do you do right here?
You need a raise, Cynthia.
Well, Tom in the background.
Yeah.